This is my art style. If you want to create an illustration like this, it might seem a little overwhelming at first. Where do you even get started? But don't worry. I'll be giving a step-by-step guide on how you can achieve something similar. Let's get right into it. Every drawing I do starts with a sketch. Everyone sketches in their own way, and you can do it in the way that's most comfortable for you. Personally, I like to have my sketches fairly clean with thin lines, but not too detailed. The most important thing to figure out during the sketch phase is to make sure that my 3D forms and shapes make sense. So I use plenty of guidelines to make sure of this. Sketching is pretty tough for me, so to be honest, I have quite a few failed sketches. That's just how sketching works sometimes. It can take a lot of time to get a sketch that I actually like. But once the sketching is done, it's time for line art. First, let's talk about the brush I'm using. I use a super simple brush with no pen pressure. It's basically almost identical to drawing in MS Paint. It's really easy to create one yourself. I have instructions on my Gumroad on how to easily recreate it. And by the way, all my brushes are actually available over there if you're interested. But hang on a second. If there's no pen pressure, how do I vary my line width? Isn't that really important? The answer to that is that I don't. For the most part, I just use the same line width for everything. I might double up a line here and there if I really want it to look a bit thicker, but mostly I don't bother with it. There are two reasons I do this. The first is that I just find it really relaxing to not have to worry about how hard I'm pressing when I'm doing line art. It's one less variable to worry about. I can spend all of my energy focusing on where the lines are supposed to go. The second is that it's actually really nice on my wrists to press very lightly. Remember to take care of your body when you draw. Now, some people might find it difficult to get smooth, clean lines if they don't press hard enough, and I feel the same way. So that's why I don't try to get smooth and clean lines at all. Let me explain. I don't actually want perfect lines. I actually think wobbly lines have a bit more character and interest. And my lines are going to be imperfect and broken because remember how I don't do very detailed sketches? I'm gonna have to problem solve and figure out a lot of the detail when I'm doing the line art. That means I'll have to undo, erase, and join lines together, which often looks a little messy. That's okay. Especially when I zoom out, people probably won't even notice anyway. They'll still think the lines are clean, even if they're really not. You might notice that while I'm doing the line art, I'm already starting to add these solid black shadows. I mainly use two tools to draw these black shadows in: the fill tool and a hard brush. You might also be wondering why I'm so messy when I use the brush to paint in these shadows, and I promise it's not that I don't know how to color inside the lines. But I think leaving little gaps here hints at additional forms inside the shadows here, and that looks cool. But how do I know where to put the shadows in the first place? Well, first we have to decide where our light source is coming from. If you imagine your drawing as a 3D object, then you have to put your shadows on the surfaces that are facing away from the light. Basically, if you know how to do cell shading, it's pretty much exactly the same thing. It's just that shadows are much darker. For more information about shading, you can check out this video right over here. Now, if you're thinking if that sounds just a little bit too simple, I confess that shading like this does come with some challenges. I find that you can't be uncertain with your 3D forms and you have to be very precise with your shadows. Any mistakes look very obvious with the high contrast. If I find that it looks a bit too harsh, sometimes I do some hatching, basically adding some shading lines here to try and soften the transition a little bit. But while I was shading, I discovered something I had never tried before. A feature, a tool. It wasn't very hidden, but I had simply never pressed it before. This button. And this is what it did. Whoa! Screen tones! I guess that makes sense because the app I'm using, Clip Studio Paint, was originally called Manga Studio. But I think they look so cool. It softens the shadow and makes the edge look less harsh. Of course, it's possible to do this with airbrushes as well, but I think using screen tones gives it a really interesting texture. This looks great. I'm gonna add it to the rest of the drawing. I really like to experiment and try new things while I draw, which is why my style seems a little inconsistent. So it's pretty ironic I'm making a video about drawing in my style when I barely know what my own style is. But what is an art style anyway? Simply put, it's just the way someone likes to draw. Less simply put, it's a combination of all of their preferences, either conscious or unconscious. It's everything they've ever learned about art, all of the fundamentals they've ever studied. It's more than simply what brushes they use or what layer styles they prefer. It's the way they interpret reality into something they like. But speaking of this style in particular, a lot of people have told me that it reminds them of Persona, or perhaps Etrian Odyssey, maybe even Hades. They all have these bold black shadows. I've always found them striking and stylish, so I'm a huge fan. You can see that they're a common theme in my old art. And besides, since I'm the type of person who hates coloring, I figured the more that I fill in with solid black, the less I would have to color in later. But speaking of color, the line art is done, and it's time to start adding flat colors. I create a layer underneath the liner and start testing some colors out. Like previously mentioned, I don't like coloring, and that's mostly because I'm not very good at it. I find picking colors very challenging because I don't really have a sense for what colors look good together. I try to make it easier by choosing a background color in advance, but you'll notice I'll be frequently changing my mind on this. But generally speaking, I tend to pick very desaturated colors. That means that these colors are not very vibrant and pretty close to gray. But not only that, they tend to be pretty close together in brightness too. The contrast between these colors is low. And I do this, well, because I really love line work. And because I want the lines to be the star of the show, I pick more boring colors so that they don't compete for attention. But then I don't want the whole illustration to look too boring, so what if I make the background a super bright yellow to make the characters stand out? Does that work? Well, as you can see, I spend a lot of time messing with sliders and correction layers until I got something I was satisfied with. Sort of. But here's where I noticed a major problem. Remember those screen tones I added earlier? I was really excited about them, but don't they look kind of bad after adding flat colors? And I think I understand why that is. There's a common saying that most digital artists have heard before, and that is never shade with black. And I'm obviously not following this rule at all. That's the thing about these types of rules. You have to understand why this is a rule in the first place. The shading on my drawing looks kind of like this. This doesn't look too bad, I think. But most shading won't be completely black, so why don't we lower the opacity of our shading layer a little bit? Doesn't it look kind of muddy? This is the reason people tell you not to shade with black. It's often better to change the color of your shadows a little bit. And essentially, I think this is what was happening with my screen tones, just with a little bit more texture. But then I thought, can I fix this? If the problem is that it's black, why don't I just change the color of the screen tones? Is this better? Well, let's just move on for now. To be honest, I could call the drawing done at this stage, and oftentimes I do just that. But there are ways to take it further. One way is by adding subtle gradients of the flat colors to make it look a little bit more dynamic. I like to add soft gradients across large flat blocks, like across this shirt. I also like to add some redness to the cheeks and nose of the face, and anywhere else the skin might be thinner. I also ended up second guessing myself again when it came to the flat colors. I think I took the it's a saturated idea a little bit too far. It's almost all completely gray. I think most people would prefer their characters to look a little bit more colorful. So I did that, but I was careful not to overdo it. At this point, I realized that even with color, I still don't like how the screen tones look, so I deleted them. And I know, it might feel like that was a waste of time, but I think experimenting is a lot of fun, even if it doesn't make it into the final results. Now I know that I should try applying them after I add flat colors, but that's for next time. Anyway, it's time to add some extra shading to really make this piece come together. I look for any crevices that the light might have a hard time entering, such as under the neck here. For these kinds of shadows, I like to make the shadow color a darker and more saturated version of the flat colors, because what little light gets into those crevices will bounce around in there and pick up some of that color. If the edge of the shadow looks too harsh, I blend it out like this. But I'm careful not to add too many of these darker shadows. I've already spent so much time establishing them, so I don't want to break up these shadow shapes. You'll also notice I added a super vibrant color to the edges of the black shadow. I do this on the skin to simulate subsurface scattering. This is due to the blood vessels right below the surface of the skin. It's something you'll often see in reality. Then I create a hard light layer on top of the flat shadows. Wait, hard light layer? Well, if you don't know how it works, here's a quick primer. If you take a 50% gray color, that is exactly halfway between black and white, and paint it on a hard light layer, it looks like this. If you're thinking that you don't see anything, then you're completely correct. 50% gray is completely invisible on a hard light layer. However, anything darker than that gray color shows up as darker, and anything lighter shows up as lighter. This is actually convenient for me because, like I said earlier, I don't want to accidentally break up any shadow shapes by accidentally adding too many dark shadows. I want to keep things subtle. And on this hard layer, it's really easy to keep track of that. I just make sure that the brightness stays between 45 and 55. On the color picker, I try to stay in this area. For this piece, I am painting the surfaces facing to our right a slightly darker color, and the surfaces facing upwards a slightly lighter color. And I wasn't kidding when I said I wanted to keep this shading subtle. Like, you can barely even see it. Is there even a point? But if you toggle the layer on and off, it actually makes a big difference. Check it out! And now it's time for the finishing touches. In the end, I decided to go for a very dark background, but I still want the characters to stand out. So I'd like a pop of color somewhere. How about a rim light? I had a very bright yellow rim light, which is an imaginary light source that is illuminating the characters from behind. Then I add a quick gradient to the background and add some screen tones there instead, and sign my name. Here's how it turned out. How do you think it looks? I hope this video helped if you want to replicate the style. And by the way, if you enjoy my videos, I work really hard on them, and I want to continue providing them for free. If you want to help support my work, I've opened up memberships on my channel. As a thank you, I provided the full time-lapse for this illustration and others, but all of my regular content will remain available for everyone. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Bye-bye!